Okay, so I can start this evening's Dhamma talk. It's on how to be at peace with sickness and death. I introduced the Dhamma talk yesterday by saying that one of the reasons why Buddhism is growing so fast in Western countries is because the teachings of the Buddha offer very powerful means of dealing with the ordinary problems of life. The philosophy of Buddhism, the attitudes of Buddhism, and especially the practices of Buddhism actually help people come to terms with such things as sickness and death, and that impresses other people who come across a sick Buddhist or a dying Buddhist or the relations of a dead Buddhist, and they see how wonderfully people cope with those experiences which for many other people cause a lot of suffering. It makes them interesting in the Buddhist philosophy and the Buddhist way of looking at things, because all people are seeking happiness in their life. And that happiness in Buddhism comes from understanding. And when that understanding is real and true, it actually helps to heal the problems of life. So Buddhism isn't just something you come and worship. Buddhism is something you come and practice, you come and understand, and if you really understand it, it will solve a lot of the difficulties and problems you face from day to day in life. In particular today, talking about the problems of sickness and death. Now I'm going to begin by asking you a question. Please put your hands up if you've never been sick in your life. Is there anyone here who's never been sick? People upstairs, please bang on the floor if you've never been sick. Okay, so I think it's very clear that everyone in this room and upstairs have been sick from time to time in their life. So it would be actually quite abnormal and strange if somebody put their hands up and they've never been sick. That would be really weird and strange and odd. It would be something wrong somewhere. So actually it's natural to be sick. It's normal to be sick. It's right to be sick. So why is it when you go to the doctor, you say, "Doctor, there's something wrong with me. I'm sick." Now, if you're a Buddhist, and I hope you're going to do this the next time you go to your doctor and you're sick, you should go to the doctor and say, "Doctor, there's something right with me. I'm sick again." Now, this is not just a joke, because one of the first reasons why people suffer so much with sickness because they think it is wrong. They say it's wrong. But psychologically, they have the idea that sickness shouldn't happen. To the point that a lot of people exercise and they eat brown rice and they have health foods and they get very disappointed when they get sick. They've done all this hard work and they still get sick. Now the point is that no matter what you do, no matter how well you look after your health, still sickness will come from time to time. So first of all, there's nothing wrong with it. So when sickness comes, we should not feel guilty that we've done something wrong. I was talking yesterday about guilt and fear, and it's strange that how those two things are implicitly connected in something like sickness. When we become sick, we feel a little bit guilty and also a bit afraid as well. We're afraid because we're losing control of our body. Before, especially when we're young, fit and healthy, we can have full control of our body, we can tell it to do whatever we want to do, and it usually complies with our wishes. But when we are sick, we can't do hardly anything we want to do. And it is humiliating and very fearful to see that we're losing control of our body. So one of the things which sickness tells us is that who does this body belong to anyway? Who does your body belong to? Does it belong to you? If it did belong to you, you'd be able to tell it to be healthy. And well, sometimes you want to be sick when you want to take a day off work maybe. But look, a lot of the times we get sick at the most inconvenient times. Some people get sick when Ajahn Brahm comes to Malaysia to give a talk and, they missed his talks again. Sometimes we get sick when we're about to go on a holiday, when we've got an important business meeting. Sickness comes when we least want it to happen. What it's telling us is that we've got no control over this thing called sickness. It's part of our body, but who's controlling this body? If the body really belonged to you, you'd be able to say, okay, it's convenient this week to be sick, but next week, please don't bother me. The point is we can't do that. So we should know from the experience of sickness that this body does not belong to us, it belongs to nature. Nature is another word for Dhamma. It belongs to nature. It belongs to cause and effect. It belongs to karma, the environment, and all sorts of other things. I'm going to get enlightened in a minute. There's going to be a beautiful flash. There we go. So the body belongs to nature. It doesn't belong to you. So this is actually, when we are sick, it's teaching us a very fundamental a very fundamental truth of Buddhism. We've all heard about anatta, non-self, haven't we? And that's one of the aspects of anatta, not mine. This body doesn't belong to me, therefore it's going to get sick when it wants to get sick, not when it's convenient to me. So when we realize it's not our fault and we've got nothing we can do about it when we're sick, then when there's nothing to do, one of my favourite sayings in Buddhism, when there's nothing to do, then we should do nothing. So we can rest and enjoy our sicknesses. Can you It's great being sick. When I'm sick, I don't have to give any talks anymore. I can just lay in bed all day and get fed. In fact, when a monk is sick, it's really good fun. One of the reasons is you're giving other people a lot of opportunity to make merits when you're sick. Like normally I don't need medicines. Normally I don't need vitamins. Normally I don't need being looked after because I'm quite fit and healthy. But when I'm sick, it's wonderful that you can all sort of nurse me and give me things. There was a monk in Chicago some years ago. He slipped over on the ground and broke his arm. Because Chicago is a very cold place. It's very icy and it snows in the winter time. He was visiting his parents, walking somewhere along the street. He slipped down, he broke his arm, had to go to hospital. When his mother came into the hospital ward to see him, he told me his mother had the biggest smile on her face he'd ever seen. He wondered, what's wrong with my mother? Doesn't she know I'm in pain? I've broken my arm. Isn't she compassionate? And then she told him why she was smiling. At last she had her son exactly where she wanted him. Now she could mother him for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it's true, isn't it, that we like looking after the people we love and care for. It's actually good fun. It's an opportunity to spread metta. Practical metta, not may all beings be happy and well, but let's go and do something about it. And so we really care, find out what they want, look after them, cheer them up, and all sorts of things like that. Which is what it's a wonderful thing, a wonderful gift, if you're sick, to give other people the opportunity of developing their metta and compassion. So that's why it's a wonderful thing when you're sick. Secondly, that when you're actually just on that, so on caring for the sick people, you have to be very careful when you go and visit people who are sick, because most times when you go and visit someone in hospital and they're sick, what do you say? You say, "How are you today?" What a stupid question that is. They're in hospital, they're sick. What do you expect them to say? And not only is it a stupid question to say, it really puts the person who's sick on the spot, because they don't want to they don't want to upset you and spoil your day. So people who are sick, when they're asked that question, "How are you feeling today?" they always tend to lie and break the fourth precept. They say, I'm feeling a bit better today, because they can't stand actually saying, I feel really awful today, and what do you ask that stupid question for? So because we're trying to be nice to the people who visit us, and when they ask us those silly questions, we tend to exaggerate, not tell the whole truth. So please never ask a person who's in hospital, how are you feeling today? Instead, actually, a wonderful thing when people are in hospitals, don't talk about their sickness, because they know what their sickness is. They ask about their sickness from the doctors and the nurses all day. When you go and visit them, talk about something else. Because they're bored by the same old people coming in again and again. How are you feeling today? That's why that some years ago I was visiting a Tibetan nun. She was an Australian, she lived in Perth, and even though I'm Theravada, she was Tibetan, even so that I'm very tolerant with the people who practice the other types of Buddhism. She stayed for a while practicing in our monastery, doing a little retreat, and when she got sick, I went to visit her. She got quite sick, she had cancer. So when it got really bad and she got moved into the hospice, I used to visit her from time to time, and this one occasion that she rang me at my monastery and said, look, can you come and visit me? I really think I'm going to die in the next couple of days, because the cancer was really far advanced now. And it's a strange thing, she was absolutely right. In 2 days she did die. People when they get close to death, they can actually pretty much know how many more days they've got left. And anyway, so I went to visit her. I went to the hospice in Perth. And of course, the first thing you have to do is to check in at the reception. And when I told them who I was and who I was going to visit, the nurse at the reception said, I'm sorry, but she's given explicit instructions that no one's to visit her. And I said, look, that can't be the case, because she just rang me an hour ago and just asked me to visit, and I dropped everything to come and see her. And the nurse said, look, she told me, absolutely, the whole of today, no visitors. And I stood my ground. I said, look, well, why did she call me? And then she said, come here. And she took me to her room, the door on her room. You see, what does that say? It said, absolutely no visitors. And then I told her, what does it say on the bottom? And in very small print was, except Ajahn Brahm. So she let me in. And I asked this Tibetan nun, I said, why did you put that down there? Absolutely no visitors except Ajahn Brahm. Why me? And she said that everyone else who comes to visit her, she's close to death, they get so upset that she's about to die, and they start crying, and they make her feel so miserable. And I'm the only one who goes in there, cheers her up, tells her jokes. And she said, look, I know I'm going to die. I don't want miserable people to come and make this worse. I want sort of people who are at ease with life and death, who are at ease with sickness, not people who are worried about it. I want someone to put me at peace, not want someone to make me more worried. And that's why she let me in. I've got a very good bedside manner when I go visit people. Because when you are sick, what would you want when you were sick? Would you want someone to say, oh, you poor thing, please don't die, please get better soon. You can't leave me and the children. You've got to get well and go to work because we haven't paid off our debts yet. Now, instead of sort of disappointing, you want to cheer someone else up who's sick. Because one of the great ways of overcoming sickness is the right attitude, a little bit of happiness. Does wonders for healing sickness. And when I went to talk to some students this afternoon, they were telling me that they really loved that video of Patch Adams. Have you seen that video? I've never seen it, but I've heard about it. Just a doctor who made people laugh and basically cheered them up and made them a little bit healthier. And it's well known in science that if you laugh, if you smile even, then I think it's endorphins are released into the bloodstream. They're nature's painkillers. Not only is it make you feel happy, it also helps with your immune system and clearing up the illness. I found that out in my first year as a monk in Thailand. Whenever we used to go on to any ceremonies in different monasteries, we used to go in the back of a pickup truck. The head monk would sit in the front seat. He was fine, but we small baby monks had to go in the back. And these pickup trucks, they're just like a tray in the back. They were covered with a metal frame over which was stretched canvas. So in case it rained, you wouldn't get wet. Now the trouble was, the roads in that part of Thailand were all gravel roads. Whenever it did rain, they would be full of potholes. And so when the truck hit a pothole, the truck went down and the monks went up. And I was much taller than the Thai monks, and also monks have got no head protection, they're bald. So when you crack your head against these metal railings, it really hurt. Now, I'd only just been ordained, I was still a young monk, so I must admit this, when I hit my head and it really hurt, I swore. That's just that's my habit. Because in the Western world, if you hurt or slip over, you curse. Now, in this particular time, I saw some of the Thai monks also hit their head. And when they hit their head, they laughed. And I thought they were absolutely crazy. How can you laugh when it hurts so bad? But again, my training was in science. So, I decided to do an experiment. I decided the next time I hit my head, instead of cursing, I'd try laughing. You know what I discovered? I discovered if you hit your head and laugh, it hurts much less. It's true. Try it. No, it was actually true, because just laughing got rid of the pain, endorphins were put in the body, nature's painkillers, you didn't hurt so much, and also you didn't bruise so much either. That degree of laughter is not only nature's painkiller, but one of the great medicines for times of sickness. So that's why if you do visit someone in hospital, take some jokes, take some laughter there. Take one of Ajahn Brahm's tapes there to cheer them up, make them laugh. And it's a great way of helping them to get better. Because when we get so serious, afraid, upset at sickness, it's liable to last a much longer time. We want people to be healthy, if it's at all possible. So one of the ways of dealing with sickness is not just to be equanimous with it, but actually enjoy it, have fun with your sickness. Laugh at it. And that's happened many times when I've seen monks who have been sick. For example, one of the first sicknesses I had was typhus fever. As all the monks in Wat Nana Chat in Thailand got this typhus fever, it's caused by a little mite which lives in the forest floor. Only the Westerners get this because all the local Thais, through generations of living in that area, they've all got natural immunity. So that when we are, one of the first experiences when I was in hospital in Thailand, this was a very remote area of Thailand at the time. The local hospital was very much a third world country hospital. And for example, they were putting all sorts of antibiotics in me with injections. And the needles they used, they weren't these just use sterilized, just use once and throw them away. These would be the ones they'd already used in Bangkok, and then they sent them out to the northeast to be used on the other patients first of all. And because monks were tough, then they last were used on us monks. And so they had to really stab you to get it through the skin. It really hurt. Not only that, but I was really feeling upset, and I was really feeling upset because one of the experiences I had was the first night I had this terrible fever and I felt really sick. I didn't know what was going on. And at 6 o'clock, the nurse went off duty. And then about after half an hour, no other nurse had come, so I asked the monk in the next bed, "Where's the night nurse?" He said, "There is no night nurse. If you happen to get ill and sick at night, that's just bad karma." That didn't really sort of make me feel all that good. But what really cheered me up one day I've been in hospital about 3 or 4 days, and I felt really miserable because of all the injections with these really blunt needles. My bottom was very, very sore, and I felt very, very sick and awful and terrible. And who came in to visit me but Ajahn Chah? And immediately I got so uplifted. I felt so wonderful that the great teacher had come to visit me. But my joy and uplift only lasted for a few seconds. Because then when Ajahn Chah opened his mouth, all he said to me was Brahma Wangso, you'll either get better or you'll die. And then he left. That's brilliant teaching, wasn't it? Brilliant Dhamma. You can't fault Ajahn Chah. He just goes right to the point of it. He said, but you don't have to worry, you won't suffer all that much longer. Either it will get better or you'll die. Which is the other thing about sickness, that we know that sickness will never last. So no matter how sick you are, you can always endure because you're either going to get better or you're going to die. When a Buddhist is sick, this is what they should do. They should actually contemplate that sickness, to use it for the growth of wisdom and understanding. I went to stay with a great teacher in Thailand, Ajahn Brahm. And when I was there, I only stayed about 7 days, and he gave a talk, especially for me. And I understood, even though it was a translation in Thai afterwards, I understood the Thai so well I didn't need a translation. He told a story when he was a young baby monk with Ajahn Mun. And when he got the malaria fever, he decided to fight it and not give in. Now this monk, Ajahn Mun, is a very tough monk. He's got enormous willpower. And so he was using that willpower to fight the sickness, to try and conquer it. And he was doing quite a good job. Now, Ajahn Mun saw this and called a meeting. And he literally scolded this young monk, Mahabua, later to be a great teacher, saying that's not the way that a Buddhist should face sickness. Don't fight it, contemplate it, understand it. Because sickness is one of your great teachers. It's teaching you that your body does not belong to you. It's teaching you that that sickness is just the space between two healthy moments. It's teaching you so much Dhamma. Why waste the opportunity and fight it and try and run away from it? Sickness should be faced up to and contemplated. Because when we contemplate sickness, we should be able to find one important truth. And that important truth is encapsulated in the teaching of the Buddha in the Dhammapada. Even though the body is sick, the mind does not need to be sick. The mind can be healthy. What he was pointing to there is there's two types of sickness, two types of pain. The bodily pain and the mental pain. And I mentioned yesterday in the talk, I think I did mention about the member of our monastery who pulls out his own teeth. I mentioned that. That's a very good example of the difference between mental pain and physical pain. It's the mental pain which thinks, oh, that's terrible, I can't do that. The physical pain is only 2 seconds, nothing at all. However, if we add mental pain to physical pain, we just cannot endure this. It's just too much. It's the same with sickness. It's the physical pain is what we can't really do anything about. But the mental pain, we can do something about. We can let go, contemplate, and even learn from that sickness. The Buddha gave a story in the Udana, which is one of my favorite stories. It can be applied to many things, but especially to most sicknesses, which I said yesterday were stress caused. It's the simile of the demon in the emperor's palace. It goes like this. There was an emperor who lived in a wonderful palace, and he was away on business somewhere. when he was away, a demon, a very ugly, offensive, fearsome monster, walked into that palace. The guards, the ministers, and all the people who worked in that palace were so shocked at the sight of this monster, this demon, that they froze, and that was long enough for the demon to go right into the emperor's chair, the throne, and sit down. As soon as that demon sat down in the emperor's chair, the soldiers, the ministers, the guards, the courtiers, they started coming to their senses. They got angry and they said, "Get out of there, you don't belong in there. Who do you think you are in sitting in our emperor's chair?" At every unkind word, unkind deed, or even unkind thought, that demon grew an inch bigger, more ugly, more smelly, and more offensive. And that made all the soldiers even more upset. They got their swords out, they flashed their swords. "If you don't get out of here quickly, you'll be in big trouble. Get out, who do you think you are?" At every unkind word, unkind deed, unkind thought, the demon just grew an inch bigger, more smelly, more ugly, and more offensive. Now this had been going on for a long time when the emperor came back. And by this time, this demon was huge, taking up half of the throne room. And he was so ugly and frightening, I don't think even Steven Spielberg could imagine something as ugly as that. And the smell would just make you reel. It was just so awful. And the language was worse than you'd hear in a pub in the worst streets of Perth on a Saturday night. It was terrible. But the emperor was the emperor for one reason, that he was the wisest of all the people in that realm. And when he saw the demon in his chair, he knew straight away what to do. He said, "Welcome. Thank you for coming to visit me, demon. It's been such a long time. Has anyone offered you something to drink yet?" And they offered this demon 4 drinks, one hot. And it's just that kind word, those kind deeds and that kind thought, the demon grew an inch smaller. Less smelly, less ugly, less offensive. And when the people in the palace saw that, they realized their mistake. So they went around being kind to the demon, asking what he needed. Exactly what type of tea do you want? Do you want herbal tea or do you want English tea? We've got Earl Grey, we've got English breakfast, we've got Darjeeling. Do you want sugar or honey? What do you want to eat? Do you want sandwiches? How about some noodles? We've got some noodles straight from KL this evening, from the best shop. How about some Malaysian coffee? Somebody gave him a foot massage. Somebody massaged his back, because demons get very sort of sore back sometimes. And they were so kind to this demon that every kind deed, word or thought, the demon grew an inch smaller, less ugly, less offensive, less smelly. And it seemed in no time at all the demon was reduced to the size when he originally came in. But they didn't stop there. They carried on with the kindness until the demon was so small that one more act of kindness and the demon vanished completely away. And that's how they got rid of the demon who entered the emperor's palace. Now that story was told by the Buddha in the Udana. He said, "Monks, that is called an anger-eating demon. It eats anger, and every bit of anger which you give it to eat, it grows an inch bigger, more ugly, more offensive, in every which way." Many sicknesses are anger-eating demons. Get out of here, you don't belong. I don't want to be sick, get out of here. These sicknesses which are stress produced will not respond if you give them more stress. That's why one wonderful way to deal with sickness is, I'm sick, make me sicker. Now try that. What it's going to mean is that when you relax with that sickness, when you accept that sickness, when you're at peace with that sickness, when you investigate that sickness rather than trying to fight it, you find very often that sickness starts to disappear. It's an anger-eating demon. You know, one of those sicknesses which fill that category of anger-eating demons today is cancer. We hate cancer. We're afraid of cancers. That's why when one comes in our body, get out of here, you don't belong. How about trying to be at peace with your cancer? If you really could do that, really do that, you'd find it would disappear. Make it vanish completely away. I tried that once, not with cancer. In my first year as a monk in this remote monastery, I had a very bad toothache. It's my toothache story. There was no medicines. There wasn't even a pair of pliers in the monastery to point it out. And there was no telephone, there was no doctors or dentists within a long way of this monastery. And like most aches and pains, they tended to get worse at night time. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be the psychology, that they get worse when you're alone at night, in your hut or in your bed, and you can't do anything. So I had a strong mind. I could meditate very well. But with that toothache, it got so bad that I couldn't watch my breath. I couldn't sit down and meditate. I just had to get up. I tried doing some walking meditation. But as I was walking backwards and forwards outside, I found I had to stop walking meditation because I was running meditation. This is what happens when you're desperate, you can't do anything slow. When you're in great pain, you have to run around. You're frantic, you're desperate. So I decided to go back into my hut and try doing some chanting. Now, I'd only been recently ordained as a monk, and to be honest, I didn't believe in all this chanting business, this hocus pocus, it's just superstition. I just went along with it because all the other monks did, but I didn't believe in it really. But I gave it a try. I had to stop the chanting because I was shouting at the top of my voice to chant. And because it hurt so much, I couldn't do anything slow or softly. And when I finished stop the chanting, I remember this occasion in my hut. It was roughly about midnight. In this forest, in this jungle, with all the other monks were fast asleep. I didn't want to wake them. And I was so desperate I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't stand the pain any longer. And I didn't have any way to escape from it. Usually, when your back is against the wall, that's when you remember the Dhamma you've been taught. And the word which came to my mind, which I'd heard many times before from Ajahn Brahm, which I've read in the books, I've heard from so many teachers, was a very simple word called let go. You've all heard that word before. Have you ever done it? That was the first time I let go. And it was an amazing experience for me, because as soon as I let go, that just word came into my mind and I followed its meaning. The pain immediately disappeared. It was an incredible experience. And it was replaced by just so much bliss, so much peace. 1 minute ago, I was desperate in agony. The next moment, there was no pain at all. I realized from that point how much of pain is added onto by the mind. I was fighting that pain, trying to get rid of it, trying to find a place where that pain wasn't, where I could be. Because of that fighting, I was making that pain worse and worse and worse. It was an anger-eating demon, and I've been feeding it. Now I let go. The demon vanished. I meditated for about an hour in the middle of the night, just so peacefully, so beautifully, no pain at all. Then about 1 o'clock, I lay down to sleep, only just for a couple of hours. When I woke up with the bell at 3 o'clock, that's when they rang the bell in Thailand. You had to get up at 3 o'clock. Actually, it was optional. You could always get up earlier than 3. When I got up at 3 o'clock, My mouth ached, the pain was there, but it was nowhere near as great as it was the night before. But from that time on, I wasn't afraid of pain. I realized what pain really is. Pain is, I don't want you to be in here. Get out. Whatever pain you experience in life, and there will become times when you're in great pain, and whatever medicine you get from your doctors, or maybe you can't get it in time, please remember those words, just let go. Maybe like myself, you'll be lucky enough to actually understand its meaning and actually do that letting go. And you'll find all the pain will disappear. There was a fellow many years ago who was working in Western Australia in the mines. He would go at night time, he was always on night shift, by himself to plant the explosives. He was the explosives man. He'd go down into the mine, put the explosives, set them off, blast them, and in the morning the other workers would come, chip away the ore and put it in the trucks to take back to the surface. It was such a dangerous job, he'd do it by himself at night when no one else was working. He said he had a premonition that something would happen that night, but nevertheless he went to work, he checked the explosives, everything was okay, there should be no danger at all. But just after putting the explosives in, he hadn't put the detonators in yet, he heard a sound behind him. It was one of the rail cars. Someone had left the brake off, and it was rolling down the incline towards him. And he said that his work of blasting was so good, there was no place to jump, to escape. The truck was coming towards him, it would hit him, and there was no way of avoiding it. So when it hit him, he tried to jump, it hit him, he fell to the ground on the tracks, and then he felt to see that there was no leg. It had severed his leg off. And he lay there, and it was the middle of the night, it would be another few hours before the first shift would find him. As he lay there, he said it was the most wonderful feeling in his life. He had what is called the religious experiences. He let go because it hurt so much. And when they found him, they took him to the hospital, they patched his leg up, he survived. He said that one of the workers came to see him. He was the one who let the brake off. And he said when he saw the worker sort of hovering around the doorway, afraid to come in because he felt so guilty, he called the worker over to him, "Come, it's okay, there's no problem at all. I want to thank you for giving me that wonderful experience." That just so confused the man, he never came in, he just ran away. It was the wrong thing to say, but he thanked that man for giving him an experience which was worth a leg. The experience of letting go. Now, that's sometimes how we can deal with sickness. We can let go. If there's something we can do, to take some medicines or to do some exercises or whatever, you can do that. But be at peace with that sickness and contemplate it. Realize if it gets better, that's marvelous. If it leads to death, that's okay also. It's all right to die. Because part of the sickness, part of the fear of sickness, is because we're afraid that that sickness might lead to our own death. And we're afraid of that. At least most people are. Buddhists shouldn't be. In fact, most Buddhists aren't afraid of death. One of she's not a devotee anymore because she died some years ago. One of the devotees at the time, Ratana, you remember her song, she developed lung cancer. There's always something wrong with her, but she went in for a checkup and they found it was lung cancer, very bad, and basically there was nothing much they could do for her. So she rang me at the monastery and I went to visit her, and when she was lying in her bed there, she was quite happy. She was laughing and joking with me. She'd very quickly come to terms with the fact that she wouldn't live for more than 2 or 3 more months. She had 4 children, sort of no husband. She separated from her husband a long time ago. 4 very good children, and she was quite confident that she brought them up well enough to look after each other. And they did. They're marvellous kids. She wasn't at all afraid of death. In fact, she was joking with me. She said, all the other Thai people, don't tell them to come and visit me now. tell them they can come and visit me later. When I'm in my coffin, I won't mind then. And she laughed. But when I walked out of the ward, the sister, the head of the ward, said, "Come over here, please. I want to talk to you in private." And this was this Irish Catholic nurse. And when she's talking, she said, "I'm so glad you've come," she said to me. "I'm so glad you've come." So that Thai girl there, she's in denial. I said, "What do you mean she's in denial?" She said, "She's not accepting the fact she's going to die." I said, "Look, she's been telling me she's going to die. She's made all her plans. She's been talking about her funeral." And then the nurse looked very confused. "Why isn't she angry then? Why isn't she upset?" Because that nurse, working in the cancer ward, just about every time she saw someone who'd been told they're going to die, they got angry, upset, cried, complained. But that girl didn't. There was no fear. She accepted straight away. And she died a very beautiful death, a very inspiring death. Her doctor, who wasn't a Buddhist, said she died with class, he said. That's Australia. And that actually showed the possibilities of dealing with death. Just like sickness, there's nothing wrong with dying. It's not against the law. It's not against the precepts. It's all right to die. So don't be afraid of it, especially if you've done lots of charity, you keep precepts, you've come to the temples, you've done a lot of support. But if you've done all that, you're going to have a wonderful rebirth. So why are you afraid of dying for? As a monk, I have to teach funerals. I have to take funerals. One of the stories I tell at funerals is this. It's a story of the couple, the married couple, who died within days of each other. I told this in Penang. This couple, like many married couples, they've been married for so long, when one died, the other one died within a couple of days. Have you seen that before? It's just, they're so close together, when one sort of dies, the other one just can't basically live without them, and they die of grief or whatever. So the two of them died within days of each other, so they appeared in heaven together. And they were met by an angel. An angel took them to this beautiful mansion overlooking the cliffs. And they said, "Because of your good karma, this mansion is yours." Now, in this life, that would be a multi-million-dollar mansion. You'd have to be sort of either a gangster or something to actually afford such a thing. And the man said, I think it's the same in Malaysia as in the other country, the more expensive your house, the more you have to pay land taxes. So this man said, "That's an expensive house, I don't think I can afford the taxes." And the angel said, "Look, this is heaven. You don't have to pay taxes up here. It's free." So they took him inside, and there were so many rooms in this mansion, and they all had just wonderful furniture. Some furniture was from Europe, there was some beautiful furniture from Australia, and even wonderful Malaysian furniture was in there as well. And they had DVDs and full-screen videos, and goodness, they had everything there. Some really expensive stuff as well. And when he was led to all these rooms, the angel gave a little card. "See, this is my email. If you want anything changed, email me and I'll fix it straight away. Is there any furniture you don't like?" And so the man said, "Look, this is some expensive furniture. I don't think I can afford the insurance premiums." And the angel said, "Look, this is heaven. We don't allow thieves up here. There are no insurance premiums to pay. This is for free. And look, anything you don't like, just let me know and I'll change it immediately." And then he took him down to a triple garage. In that garage there was a new 4-wheel drive, a huge monster of a vehicle, next to which was a Rolls-Royce stretch limousine. And then next to that was a red Ferrari sports car, just a special issue. There's only about 30 of them in the whole of heaven. And he said that these are yours to drive around. If there's anything you don't like, remember my email, I'll change the model straight away. And the angel said, just to let him know, look, there's no policeman up in heaven, so you can speed as much as you like. And he'd always wanted a sports car, but of course in this world he could never afford it. And if he did afford it, he could never really enjoy it because of all the policemen on the roads. So, he said, they're wonderful cars, especially that red Ferrari, but look, when you have expensive cars like this, you have to pay license fees for the government. And basically, I've got no money, I can't afford this. And the angel said, there are no license fees up in heaven, this is all for free. Even the petrol is free. And he opened the gates of the doors of the garage, and the opposite side of the road was this beautiful 18-hole golf course. And he really liked his golf, because Malaysians like golf as well, don't they? He really loved his golf, and the angel said, see that golf course on the other side of the road? That was designed by Greg Norman. And that country club over there, that's one of the best country clubs I'll arrange. You don't have to queue up. You don't have to wait to tee off, and there'll be a caddy waiting for you at any time of the day. And even because it's heaven, we'll throw in a few holes in one at every round, just to make you happy. And he looked at that clubhouse, and it was just so immaculate and so fancy. He said, look, I don't think I can afford the club fees. And the angel said, look, there are no club fees, there's no license fees, there's no insurance, nothing to pay up here. This is heaven, this is your reward for all the good karma. You know, for making all those donations to the BGF. And so the angel left them with a beautiful mansion, sports cars, golf club across the road. And as soon as the angel left them, this man started getting really angry at his wife. He started scolding her and getting really upset. And his wife just couldn't understand. He said, look, why are you getting angry at me for? We've got this wonderful house, this beautiful furniture, and you've got your red sports car. I know you always wanted one. And you've got your golf course on the other side of the road. You can play any time you want. Why are you so angry at me? And the man looked at his wife and said, wife, if it wasn't for all your health food, I could have been up here years ago. So why are you feeding your husband all his health food? Now, the moral of that story is that why are good people afraid to die? When they've got mansions and Ferrari sports cars and golf clubs. Maybe heaven might not be exactly like that, but certainly we know we should have confidence and faith. No matter what religion you are, all the religions say if you're a good person, you're going to have a wonderful rebirth. So why are we afraid to die? Why are we afraid when other people die, especially when they are old and they've had enough of this body? Why can't we just let them go? A lot of the times it is because we don't understand death, we're afraid of death, and we don't look upon it in a proper way. That death is just the ending of one life. As a Buddhist, we know we're going to have another life afterwards, if not in heaven, back on earth or somewhere else. So never think you've finished with school. You're going to have to go back there again next time. And do more exams. Unless you become fully enlightened and have an end of all this schooling and nappies and growing up and all that sort of stuff. But when we understand what rebirth is, it takes away the fear of death. Especially if we've been a good person. I tell people that, actually I tell that joke at funeral services. The first time I told that joke, I saw they have these funeral directors. These are the people who actually organise the funerals and do all the arrangements. And they wear, they're the ones who carry the coffin in. They wear black suits and they look very sort of formal and serious. And when I was up there sort of giving this talk and this joke, he was standing at the back. He was frowning at me. He said, don't do that, don't do that. Because you're not supposed to tell a joke at a funeral. Do they tell jokes at Chinese funeral services? The point was that everybody laughed when I told that joke. And when they laughed, the funeral director at the back was a big sigh of relief. And afterwards they all came up to me and said, "Thank you so much. Thank you for telling that joke, because that's what he would have wanted. He didn't want people to be upset and cry at his funeral. Do you want people to be upset and suffer and cry at your funeral, or would you like them to be happy? If you want them to be happy, you can invite me to give your funeral service." But it's not just levity, because it's making a point not to be afraid to die. And they also tell another story at the funeral service, which is a more serious one, but a very beautiful story as well, which is why I tell it very often. And it comes from my heart, because it comes from my own life when I was a young man. My father died when I was 16. And I love that man very much. He was a very good father to me. But when he died, at his cremation, I never cried. I never felt sad. My eyes never went watery. And I haven't cried since. I felt no grief. And it took me a long time to explain what I felt, as much to myself, if not to other people. And I've incorporated this story into just about every funeral service which I conduct. This is how I explained how I felt to myself. Again, I use similes. When I was a young man, growing up in London, I loved music. I used to go to many concerts in London, and there were some of them classical music concerts, sometimes rock concerts, folk, jazz. I used to like every type of music. And I used to sometimes see people would later on become famous. Even some of these rock bands. I saw the first concert of Led Zeppelin just in a small club. I remember seeing Rod Stewart in a top floor of a pub with about only 5 or 6 other people who came that evening to see this band. All these people later on became world famous. But at that time they were just small time bands. And I loved that. I used to go to the Royal Albert Hall to listen to concerts. And I remember vividly, even as I talk to you now, I remember so clearly, when the concert was over, I would stand up and clap for more, shout for more. So would a lot of other people as well, because I love my music. And the band would very often play on a little bit longer. The orchestra would just play maybe another 10 minutes. But then eventually the orchestra had to go home. They had to pack away their instruments and go back to their own families. It was late at night. And as I walked out of those concert halls of London, it was always drizzling, cold, dark and gloomy outside. But even though I knew that I would never hear that performer again, I never once felt sad. What I felt when I went out into that cold London night was what a wonderful performance that had been, and how lucky I was to have been there at the time. How fortunate to have heard such great music played by such a great orchestra. And I carried that music in my mind all the way home on the underground train. And even the next day, I was inspired and uplifted by great performances. And I realized that was precisely the feeling I had in my heart when my own father died. When I went out of that crematorium into the cold, gloomy London afternoon, I felt what a wonderful performance that was, Father, and how lucky I was to have known you. and to have been with you for 16 years. Thank you. And I always remembered his examples and his teachings to me. I never felt sad. I felt grateful. I felt uplifted. I felt inspired by a wonderful life. I would have wanted it to go on longer. It would have been great if he could have seen me as a monk. He would have been so proud. But I was just grateful for those 16 years. I knew a man like that. He was the one who told me when I was couple of years earlier. He took me aside and he told me, he said, "Son, whatever you do in your life, whatever you do, the door of my house will always be open to you." I always remember those words. Again, it took me a while to really understand fully what they meant, because his house was a small apartment in London. It wasn't much of a house to open to anybody. But what he really meant was, "Son, whatever you do in your life, the door of my heart will always be open to you. You'll always be my son. I will always love you. I might argue with you, I might not agree with you, but please know, I will always love you." And that was the first understanding I ever had of unconditional love, whatever I did. And that's the sort of man he was. So when he died, I felt so inspired that I knew such a wonderful man. I've told that story many times at funeral services. And I've changed people's grief into inspiration. People thought they were going to cry, and instead they started looking at how grateful, how lucky they were to have known a person who's now passed away for so many years. And they say, "Thank you, wife. Thank you, husband. Thank you, father. Mother, what wonderful music that was. What a wonderful life we shared for those few years. Thank you so much." And they go out of that funeral celebrating a life rather than mourning a death. That's the Buddhist attitude to life and death. So enough of all these tears. How about some inspiration when our loved ones pass away? A sense of gratitude. Thank you for being my father, my mother, my friend for so many years. That attitude is noble. That attitude is wise. That attitude puts a completely different complexion on life and death. It accepts death as inevitable, as part of life. It brings it in and it deals with it in a wonderful way. It's being at peace with death. Being at peace with death is not that hard a thing to do. When I've performed those funerals, some of the first times I did this funeral, I remember one funeral I did for this he's an English man. He was only about 21 when he died of cancer. And his parents came all the way over from England to actually, obviously, to come to his funeral service. They knew he was a Buddhist, they knew nothing about Buddhism. And I remember very clearly that because he was a Buddhist, he wanted a Buddhist funeral, and I was the one who was conducting that funeral for him. And these were an English man and an English woman from a village in the southwest of England, very conservative. And when they saw me come in to conduct the funeral service for their son, I saw their faces drop. I knew what they were thinking. Oh my God, who is this doing a funeral service for our boy? He was my only son. What is this? Can't we have a vicar or a priest or something to do a proper service, please? But when I finished that funeral service, they were so impressed, they wrote out a cheque for $500 on the spot. And they came and visited. About 5 years later, they say, to our monastery. They went back to England, they came back and said, we can't get you out of our mind. That was such a wonderful funeral service that meant so much to us. We were so upset at losing our son, only 21 years of age, to cancer. He said, you turned all our sorrow around and made us feel at peace with our son's death. Thank you. They came all the way over to England 5 years later, especially to see me. No other thing. And I was very touched by that. I've been very touched by many other funeral services I've done for Buddhists, when the relations who are Christians come up to me afterwards and say, look, I'm a Christian, but when I die, will you do my funeral for me as well? Because this is coming to terms, with death. There's nothing wrong with death. So bring death into your life as part of life and be at peace with it. A lot of times when you're at peace with death and dying, you live much longer. This is another story I like to tell. There's this monk. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He was a wrestling champion in the United States, but also very intelligent, and won a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, and later he became a monk. But while in Thailand as a monk, he developed an illness. Unfortunately, we had a doctor visiting our monastery because he diagnosed it as typhoid. Later on, I saw the doctor who was on that ambulance waiting for this monk, and he told me that when he first saw that monk come off the train, he thought he would not get him to the hospital in time. He was deeply in shock, just really on the edge. But he got him to the hospital in time, he kept him going, and he survived, sort of, because he never really recovered his health. He was always sickly. And so we sent him to our monastery in England, thinking that in England you get better medical treatment. We gave him every medical treatment there was. And some of that medical treatment made him a tiny bit healthy, but nothing really worked. So what happened next? After 2 or 3 years of him being very sick, not really getting recovered at all, the abbot of this monastery, Ajahn Sumedho, understood, had an insight, a Buddhist little piece of wisdom. And so he went up to the room, this attic in Chithurst Monastery in England, where this monk was lying on his bed, again feeling close to death. And he went up to that room, there was just the two of them in that room, and he said, I've come up here on behalf of all of the other monks who live in this monastery, on behalf of the nuns, the laymen and the lay women who support us. I've come up here on behalf of everybody to give you permission to die. You can die, it's all right. Don't try so hard to keep on living. And at that, this tough Rhodes Scholar from Oxford, wrestling champion from the United States, burst out crying. He wept and wept and wept and wept. And from that time on, he started to recover. And he's alive today. Not in great health, but reasonable health. It's a pretty amazing recovery. That monk Ajahn Sumedho saw the problem. He was trying so hard to get better, it was making him sick. It was stress. He was trying so hard not to die because he thought that was the worst thing he could do to his friends and loved ones, to die on them. That's why to this day, after that experience, when I counsel people who are dying, and that's part of my job also, I go up to them, first of all I ask them, when they're getting close to death, have you given yourself permission to die yet? In other words, are you at peace with your impending death? And I try and encourage them to say it's okay to die. There's nothing wrong with it. Be at peace with it. But secondly, that many people who are close to death keep telling me that they have given themselves permission to die. They're at peace with their impending death. But what causes them most trouble is their relations want them to live. And they cause the dying people so much suffering. They're ready to go, but their relations will not let them. Mother, mother, please don't die. Please get better. Please get better. And so I tell the relations also, in your own way, in your own time, go up to the person who's dying and give them permission to die. I remember one of the times I did this, there was a young man, Steve his name was. He was only about 31, 32, again with cancer. He was inoperable. He was dying. He only had 1 or 2 days left. I went to visit him and his wife Jenny. And I told Jenny, I first of all talked to him, are you okay, are you ready to die? He said, yes, I am. And I told Jenny, have you given Stephen permission to go yet? Because this man and wife who still loved each other very deeply. And so it was a wonderful thing. I just stood back and Jenny just crawled on the bed and held her husband and said, Stephen, I give you permission to die. And they hugged and both cried. And it's a wonderful way for them to let go of each other. Really, remember what I said about unconditional loving kindness? The words of my own Father, the door of my heart is open to you, no matter what you ever do, even if you die. Love is something which should liberate the people we love, which should free them. So I love you enough. I want you to be happy. I want you to be at peace. I give you, darling, my wife, my husband, or my little child, I give you permission to die. That's freeing that person. Even young people, it's all right to die. As Buddhism, we know it's according to past karma. Sometimes people die when they're old, sometimes people die when they're young. You know what the biggest problem, especially in the Western world, is when people die when they're young? They think that something's gone wrong again. Just when I started this talk, hands up if you've ever been sick, ever not been sick, sorry, and everyone had been sick. It's natural, it's not wrong to be sick. It's not wrong to die, even when you're young. I've known many children who've died from the time they've been born, 1 year old, 2 years old. Once there was one baby who'd been born only, and they tried to heal it, but after about 3 or 4 weeks it died. And so I think it was a Hong Kong family. So they really wanted to do the very best for their child, but they just couldn't stand going to the funeral themselves. So they sent their child in a small box in one of these stretch limousines, with 2 funeral directors in front. Because I was going to do the service, I had to sit in the back of that limousine as well. It was great fun when I came to the traffic lights. Because when you come to the traffic lights and you see a limousine, people are always looking to see who's inside. They look like chauffeurs in front. And they couldn't see the coffin because it was very low down on the seat. So I waved to them. I have great fun. It's the only time I've been in a stretch limousine. But people die at all ages. And when I was a young monk, someone told me this story, because it's hard to understand the death of young ones. It's a very wonderful story, which again I tell at funerals when someone dies in their youth. There was a monk who was living in jungles in Thailand many years ago. He was living in a very simple hut made of bamboo and thatch. He'd been living in the jungle for many months. One evening there was a very powerful storm in that jungle. The rain lashed down, and worse than that, the winds were very fierce. They were so strong they started to uproot trees. and he heard huge trees come crashing down to the ground around his hut. He admitted he was so scared he never slept all night, because he knew if one tree just clipped his hut, there was no protection. It was just bamboo, that's all. As it happens, the storm abated in the early morning. He survived. So he went outside to see what damage had been done. Sure enough, some trees fell very, very close to his hut, but they'd all missed. He was very lucky. But then what took his attention were not the trees and the twigs, but what took his attention were the leaves, which had been torn from the trees the night before. As he would have expected, and you would expect, most of the trees torn off the twigs the night before were the old brown leaves. Leaves which had lived a full life on the trees and now lay dead, scattered on the forest floor. But amongst those old brown leaves there were many yellow leaves, and also green leaves as well. And there were even a few very bright green leaves which he knew would have only sprouted from the twigs maybe 1 or 2 days at most. They too had been torn from the trees by the storm and lay dead on the ground. But he wanted to check to see what leaves were left on the trees. And again, as you would expect, most of the leaves on the trees still alive were the green leaves. But even though young green leaves lay dead on the ground, there were still a few old brown curly leaves still clinging on. He realized that this is just like life. Young people die, where your old grandmother is still clinging on, old brown curled up leaf, she is. And he realized that this is nature, this is Dhamma. Nothing has gone wrong. This is the way things are. This is Dhamma. As in nature, so in the world of human beings. When the storms of illness and accidents rip through our community, they usually take the old people, but they also take many young people as well, even babies. And if ever you think that something's gone wrong, this shouldn't happen. Why does a young person have to die? It means you're not understanding the Dhamma. The Dhamma teaches us we could die at any time. Ajahn Chah always used to ask us, have you come here to die? Are you ready to die? Are you ready to die? Are you? How many people are there here today? I think yesterday they said there's roughly about 300 people here, 150 people down here, 150 people up the top. 300 people in all. According to statistics, about 6 of you will be dead by the time I come here next year. Which 6 is it? And don't just look at the old people. When we understand death, it transforms our life. What it does when we know we're going to die, it means that we value life much more. Being at peace with death is accepting death happens, accepting it will happen at any time, just like the leaves on the tree. There's nothing wrong with death. We can give permission to ourselves to die and other people to die. If we've made a lot of good karma, we don't have to be afraid at all. We're going to have a lovely mansion with a golf course and Ferraris and everything there. So surely we should be at peace. But also, what that means, because we know we're going to die, we have to make the best use of the time we have. One of the other stories I tell at funerals, There's a friend of mine who lived in Sydney, who was a businessman. This businessman went for a medical checkup. A couple of days later, he got a call from his doctor at home. And the first thing his doctor said was, "Is your wife there?" From the tone of his voice and from that question, he knew that something was terribly wrong. "What's wrong?" he said to the doctor. He said, "Look, I'm sorry to have to say this, but the results have come back from the pathology lab. You've got a cancer, a bad cancer. It's very rare, it's very advanced. I'll give it to you straight, there's nothing we can do." And he said, "How long?" He said, "You can't tell in such cases. It could be 2 months, it could be 3 months, but it will never be 6 months. Please get your affairs in order." And this came like a shot out of the blue to this businessman. He felt so fit, he hadn't got any signs at all that cancer was happening, as is always the case. So he talked to his wife and his children, and he soon came to terms with the fact he was going to die soon. He had always promised his family a trip to Europe, but he never had the time. Now, with only a few months left, he decided he was going to take that trip to Europe with his wife and children. He sold his business within a couple of days. He said it wasn't the best price you could get for a business, but it was actually quite good that he sold it so quickly. It was reasonable. And he bought first-class tickets. This was his last trip with his wife and children. He wanted to do it first class. When he had the tickets in his hand, he got another call from his doctor. It's a true story, it happened. The doctor was even more concerned. He said, "I don't know how to tell you this. There's been a mistake. 2 people, same surname. You are perfectly healthy." Now, if that was the US, he'd probably sue that doctor. But that man called his doctor one of his greatest teachers. He's so grateful to that whole experience. He went on that trip to Europe with his family. He enjoyed himself so much. His family are important to him. He never realized how much until this happened. He had enough money back to get another business. He got a small cafe, like they call it a truck stop, where people travelling along the main highways would stop for petrol and for food. He's a great fellow. He said that experience changed his whole life. He realized that death can come at any time. Because of that, he valued every day, and what before was important, like getting rich, didn't matter so much anymore. His family, his spiritual life, that became so important. What death should do to us is remind us the importance of life. What are we here for? Is it just to become the richest person in the cemetery? To get the fanciest headstone? Or is it to make sure that we live this life so when it's time that we go, that we realize we've used our life wisely? We've enjoyed our life. We've also done charity work. We've served the community, so that the world is a better place for us, not a worse place. We've made good karma. We've learnt about life, so we haven't wasted our time. And if you, when you die, can look at your life and say, yes, I've lived a good life. I've looked after my family. I've cared for the community. I've done charity. I've kept precepts. I've served. Then when you die, you will die with a very peaceful mind. And your friends and relations will think what a wonderful performance that was, and how lucky I was to have known such a person. And that ends this talk on how to be at peace with sickness and death. Okay, very good. So I think we got some questions I've seen passing around. So I don't know how long these questions will take to answer, because there's probably heaps of them. So we'll start as we go. So the first questions are, I'll just answer this. What made you decide to become a monk?